As Sherlock Holmes said, when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Let's apply this principle to the investigation of the Dyatlov group tragedy. Theory 1. Attack by the Mansi. This was one of the first theories proposed after the bodies were found and the investigation began. It was suggested that the Mansi might have attacked the hikers due to a conflict or because the group had trespassed on sacred land. However, several counter-arguments quickly arose. First, the nearest Mansi settlement was about 100 kilometers away from the site of the tragedy, and the mountain Kolatsyakl was not considered sacred by the Mansi. Moreover, no evidence of an attack was found at the site. Additionally, the Mansi people participated in the search efforts and had always been friendly toward hikers. This theory was soon dismissed. Theory 2. Avalanche. This is a natural theory in such situations. Most mountain accidents are related to avalanches. However, even the prosecutor's office initially did not support this theory. The angle and location of Mount Kolatsyakl made an avalanche highly unlikely. The tent was still standing, and nearby skis and poles remained in place. Also, the snow on top of the tent was minimal. Some proponents of the avalanche theory suggest that the snow could have been blown away by the wind, but then why were the hikers' tracks undisturbed? The injuries found on some of the group members, such as rib and skull fractures, also did not align with typical avalanche injuries. Snow slab theory. There is a more complex variation of the avalanche theory, the snow slab theory. This suggests that a layer of compacted snow may have slid down onto the tent, triggered by temperature changes and the tent's location on the slope. Unlike a typical avalanche, a snow slab consists of dense, compacted snow. One of the main proponents of this theory was Boris Slabtsov, one of the searchers who discovered the tent. According to this theory, the snow slab could have fallen on the tent unexpectedly, explaining the lack of clothing on many bodies and the severe injuries, such as rib and skull fractures. After the slab fell, the hikers may have tried to cut their way out of the tent. Some would have been injured immediately, while others, less injured, helped them down the slope. The severely injured were left in the ravine where their friends tried to keep them warm, which is why they had more clothing on. The rest attempted to return to the tent, but were unable to make it and froze. Slabtsov cites several examples of similar tragedies, and overall, the argument sounds logical. The snow slab theory also explains the presence of snow on the tent and the freezing of some of the hikers, which is typical of such incidents. However, this theory still does not account for many details, such as the missing eyes and tongue of some victims, which supporters of this theory attribute to animal activity. Despite its compelling argument, the snow slab theory remains incomplete and cannot explain every aspect of the Dyatlov group's tragedy. Theory 3. Strong wind. This theory was also considered early in the investigation. According to meteorological experts, on the night of February 1st, strong winds of about 60 kilometers per hour were indeed blowing on Mount Kolatsyakl. That's a significant speed, but not strong enough to sweep people off their feet or cause serious injuries. A hurricane-force wind would have to be nearly twice as strong. Moreover, even if we assume that one or more members of the group were blown down the slope and the others ran to help, it's unclear why they would have done so with almost no clothing or footwear. The Dyatlov group were experienced hikers and unlikely to act so recklessly. Besides, the tent and most of the belongings left behind make the strong wind theory seem improbable. Theory 4. Weapons testing. This theory splits into two sub-theories. Let me remind you that prosecutor Lev Ivanov, in interviews from the 1990s, said he had been strongly urged to close the case and not consider the fireball theory. Moreover, he stated that in his opinion, these fireballs were the true cause of the Dyatlov group's death. On one hand, Ivanov's statements, made 3 decades after the tragedy, should be taken with some skepticism. He didn't clarify whether these fireballs were weapons or rockets. In a newspaper, he referred to the phenomenon as a mass of energy, unexplainable by modern science. On the other hand, even a basic understanding of history gives us insight into the era in which the Dyatlov group tragedy occurred. The height of the Cold War and the space race. Rockets were being launched from the Plesetsk and Baikonur cosmodromes, and the incidents of February 17th and March 31st, when Kailin's group and other witnesses saw fireballs in the sky, can be linked to rocket launches. These launches did indeed occur around those dates. However, there is debate among researchers about whether it was even possible to see rocket launches from those cosmodromes in the Ural Mountains region. While there are complex mathematical calculations involved, the main issue is that there is no concrete evidence that anyone actually saw fireballs on February 1st, the night of the Dyatlov group's tragedy. The only exception is the vague story involving Kolevatov's father, who was allegedly told about it by 2 hikers. As for the infamous photograph from Krivonishenko's camera, showing a bright spot on a dark background, it is most likely a random shot, either taken by the hikers or by one of the searchers. The bright spot is a clear lens flare, and its octagonal shape suggests a light source that cannot be identified due to extreme defocusing. The desire of high-ranking officials at the time to close the case and avoid delving into the fireball theory could be linked to the rocket launches. The second branch of the weapons theory involves the hypothesis that the hikers were exposed to radiation from some type of weapon. This theory emerged as early as the spring of 1959, when Ivanov was conducting his investigation. One of the experts he interviewed suggested that strange gases could have caused the hikers' bizarre behavior. Ivanov ordered a radiological examination, and the results were intriguing. Some of the victims' clothing showed elevated levels of radiation. The examination revealed beta radiation levels of 5,000 to 10,000 disintegrations per minute on Dubinina's sweater and on Kolevatov's sweater and pants. No traces of radiation were found on the other clothing items. The strange dark or orange hue of the victim's skin, described by some funeral attendees, can also be explained. Before being buried under snow, the bodies had been exposed to the elements for some time, potentially under ultraviolet light. Even on cloudy days, this exposure is a more plausible explanation for the skin discoloration than radiation. This version of radiation exposure also ties into the theory involving so-called infrasound. This natural phenomenon could have been caused by air currents in the mountains, and infrasound is believed to cause disorientation or altered states of consciousness. However, infrasound was briefly experimented with as a weapon by several countries, but was abandoned after it was found to have minimal impact. Its effects certainly wouldn't have been enough to provoke the extreme behavior seen in the Dyatlov group. The results of the radiological examination were removed from the criminal case and placed in the special section of the Sverdlovsk Regional Prosecutor's Office, deemed unrelated to the case. However, for specialists, the source of the radiation on the hikers' clothing was not a mystery, even in 1959. On September 29, 1957, the Mayak chemical plant in the Chelyabinsk region experienced a radioactive waste explosion known today as the Kishtim disaster. This explosion created the East Ural radioactive trace, ERT, which affected the Chelyabinsk, Tyumen and Sverdlovsk regions, including the areas where UPI students conducted training hikes in preparation for their Polar-Ural expedition. According to the chief radiologist of the Sverdlovsk region, the hikers' clothing became contaminated with radiation during these training hikes. This selective contamination rules out the theory that the entire group was exposed to radiation, rendering many of the associated theories baseless. Nevertheless, radioactive contamination is far from the most bizarre theory about what happened to the Dyatlov group. For example, one version claims that CIA agents attempted to purchase Krivonishenko's clothing, which allegedly contained traces of radioactive plutonium. Theory 5. Criminal involvement. This theory is straightforward. The members of the hiking group could have been victims of escaped convicts, former labor camp prisoners or poachers. However, this assumption is easily debunked by the fact that no evidence of criminals was found near the tent or the victims. Moreover, nothing was stolen from the tent or their storage, neither money, alcohol, nor food. Theory 6. Conspiracy. Perhaps one of the most elaborate theories suggests that two members of the group, Zolotaryov and Kolevatov, were collaborating with the KGB. According to this theory, the entire expedition was a cover for a controlled delivery operation. Under the guise of a student hiking trip, these two KGB agents were supposed to meet with foreign intelligence agents in the Ural Mountains and hand over certain classified information, including materials related to the Soviet nuclear program. The foreigners were supposed to believe the data was valuable and genuine, but in reality it was disinformation controlled by the KGB. Something went wrong during the meeting. Perhaps the foreign agents suspected a trap and decided to eliminate the Dyatlov group. They did it in the most professional way, leaving no traces. The plan was to force all the hikers out into the freezing cold under the threat of weapons, leaving them to freeze to death. However, the plan didn't entirely work, and 3 of the members had to be physically attacked, which explains the broken ribs, injuries, and missing tongue. Supporting this theory, we can note that during the Cold War, foreign states were indeed engaged in espionage activities on Soviet territory. Spy planes, balloons, and agents were deployed. However, the main problem with this theory is the lack of direct evidence. It's based on minor inconsistencies and gaps that do exist in the case. Supporters of the theory claim that the absence of evidence of the Dyatlov group's murder proves the professionalism of the culprits, but the lack of evidence simply suggests an absence of evidence, not proof of a conspiracy. Some still believe that the authorities are hiding something that could definitively explain the cause of the group's death. However, such speculation seems illogical when we look at the facts. Yes, the case was classified for a time, which can be explained by the Cold War environment and general caution, but the case was declassified while the USSR still existed. Furthermore, by law, after 25 years, if there were no appeals, the case could have been disposed of, but that didn't happen. It remains available. Since the time of perestroika, and after the collapse of the USSR, a massive amount of previously classified documents, including ones uncomfortable for the authorities, has been released. How could the death of 9 hikers in the Ural Mountains threaten the state 60 years later? There are now more than 100 theories surrounding the Dyatlov group's demise. In 2019, the General Prosecutor's Office sought to bring an end to the speculation and launched an investigation led by Deputy Head of the Urals Federal District, Andrei Kuryakov. In July 2020, he announced that the hikers had been killed by a snow avalanche. The statement caused a public outcry. Friends of the Dyatlov group were convinced that a technological accident was the real cause. Pyotr Bartolomei argued that the avalanche theory was a smokescreen. He also disagreed with the hurricane theory, citing an example from a hike with Igor in the polar Urals a year before the tragedy. One evening, the weather worsened suddenly and the wind was so strong that they couldn't pitch their tent. We lowered it to the snow, surrounded it with backpacks and sat on top. It flapped and howled, and we spent the whole night holding it down, huddled together. The weather cleared up only at dawn. We made it through without any losses or frostbite, Bartolomei recalls, but running out of a tent into a hurricane would be a sure death. Igor knew this and would never have done it voluntarily. Relatives criticized Kuryakov's statement. Evgeny Arsentievich Chernusov, a former senior investigator for the USSR and Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs, representing the interests of the Dyatlov family, filed a formal request for an internal investigation. In October 2020, Kuryakov was disciplined for exceeding his official powers. They didn't let them close the case. More than a year has passed, but the families have still not been clearly informed about the outcome of the investigation initiated in 2019, Chernusov points out. There are still many questions regarding the investigation. The results of the histological and chemical analyses of the internal organs of the first 5 discovered tourists have disappeared. Prosecutor-investigator Ivanov immediately questioned whether poisoning was involved. The tests were conducted in a Sverdlovsk laboratory, but no report with the data exists. As for the other 4, no analysis was even ordered, Chernusov emphasized. He leans toward the theory of aircraft testing. In the 1959 case file, there's no case number or title. For some reason, they wanted to keep it off the books. You have to remember the context of that time. The first satellite launch, the first human flight into space. Testing was in full swing. Evgeny Arsentievich intends to continue fighting for an investigation into the hikers' deaths. If they classify it, the relatives won't object. To determine the exact cause of death, exhumation is necessary. But more importantly, witnesses need to be thoroughly questioned, while we still have the chance. For instance, among the first rescuers were many experienced mountaineers, yet none of them proposed the avalanche theory. Secondly, if the flashlight was left on top of the tent before the snow slab descended, why wasn't it buried? And if it was placed there afterward, why didn't they dig the tent out right away? Evgeny Chernusov, representing the Dyatlov Memorial Public Foundation, also disagrees with Kuryakov's conclusions. In his view, the only plausible explanation for the tragedy is a technological accident. However, determining exactly what caused the Dyatlov group's death seems unlikely today, as the gathering and preservation of evidence were handled extremely poorly. Basic forensic procedures were violated, there are no detailed photographic records, and the crime scene was not properly examined. The autopsy reports were filled out with numerous errors. Not only did they violate standard autopsy procedures for that time, but they also failed to meet the requirements of the criminal procedure law. For example, half of the reports were not signed by witnesses, which was mandatory at the time. While experts agree that the cause of death was hypothermia, the way these conclusions were documented has been criticized as extremely careless, even undermining the entire investigation. All the autopsy reports are nearly identical. The only changes are in height, weight, clothing, and a few details. So today it's impossible to assess what happened using forensic medicine. In the end, the issue of reopening the investigation is off the table. There simply aren't legally sound forensic records to support it. Meanwhile, the incident at the pass near Mount Kolatsyakhl, which today bears the name of Igor Dyatlov's group, is far from the most tragic or mysterious case in Soviet and Russian hiking history. On January 26, 1973, 10 hikers, students of the Kibyshev Aviation Institute, died on the Kola Peninsula near the Chivroe Pass. On September 10, 1975, 21 hikers died on the slope of Mount Guzaripal in the Caucasus Ridge, Adygea, during a hike with a group of 53 people. In July 1989, an experienced group of climbers led by Pyotr Klokhkov disappeared without a trace on Mount Pamir, now in Tajikistan. Their fate remains unknown, and their bodies were never found. On August 5, 1993, 6 of the 7 hikers in a group led by instructor Korovina perished at the Kamar-Daban Pass in Buryatia, including Korovina herself. Most of the group members were students of a pedagogical college from Petropavlovsk, Kazakhstan. In all these cases, experienced hikers led by seasoned and often decorated instructors set out on their treks, only for the weather to take a sudden turn for the worse. The true cause of their deaths remains a mystery. Be sure to subscribe. Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your theories about what might be going on with the Dyatlov group and whether you're interested in such stories. And don't forget to like the video and share it with your friends.